The emergency klaxon screamed through the corridors of the Zephyrian diplomatic vessel as Captain Thexera burst into the nursery quarters. Her 4 eyes swept the room frantically, taking in overturned furniture and torn fabric. The protective barriers around the sleeping alcoves hung in shreds. "Report," she snarled at the trembling nursery keeper. "The cubs, Captain." The keeper's voice cracked with terror. "All 12 of them. Gone." Thexera's chitinous plates flared along her spine. In her 300 years of life, she had never heard of Zephyrian cubs being taken. Their species ruled a vast empire built on conquest and fear. Even their young possessed razor-sharp claws and teeth that could tear through steel. What creature would dare steal the offspring of the galaxy's apex predators? "Security footage?" she demanded. The keeper's head tendrils writhed in distress. "The systems were disabled. Whoever did this knew our technology." Thexera activated her comm unit. "All stations, this is the captain. Lock down the ship. No one leaves until we find our young." But even as she gave the order, a cold dread settled in her chest. The ship's sensors showed no unauthorized vessels in the area. The human research station they were orbiting remained in its standard position, broadcasting the same boring scientific data it had been transmitting for months. The humans. Thexera's secondary arms clenched into fists. The soft, weak creatures had established their little outpost in this system 6 months ago, claiming to study the local star's unusual radiation patterns. The Zephyrian Empire had allowed it only because the humans posed no threat. They had no natural weapons, no impressive technology, and no military presence worth mentioning. But perhaps that had been a mistake. "Prepare a boarding party," Thexera ordered. "If the humans think they can take our cubs for their pathetic experiments, they will learn why our species conquered half the galaxy." An hour later, 12 Zephyrian warriors materialized on the human research station's docking bay. Each stood 8 feet tall, their armored exoskeletons gleaming under the artificial lights. Their weapons powered up with ominous hums as they advanced through the corridors. The humans they encountered seemed genuinely surprised by their arrival. A female scientist with strange yellow fur growing from her head dropped a datapad when she saw them. "Oh, Captain Thexera, what brings you to our station?" she asked with that peculiar human expression where they showed their teeth. "Our cubs are missing," Thexera stated coldly. "We have reason to believe your people are responsible." The human's face changed color, becoming pale. "Missing? That's terrible. How can we help you find them?" The apparent concern in her voice only angered Thexera more. Humans were known to be deceptive creatures, capable of producing false emotions at will. "We will search your station. Any resistance will be met with extreme force." "Of course, search anywhere you need to," the human replied quickly. "Dr. Peterson, our station commander, is in the main lab. I'll take you to him." As they moved through the station, Thexera noted the primitive conditions. The corridors were narrow and cramped compared to Zephyrian ships. The walls were covered with strange symbols and images that meant nothing to her. Most disturbing were the soft surfaces everywhere, cushioned chairs, fabric wall hangings, and carpeted floors. How did these creatures survive in such vulnerable environments? Dr. Peterson, a male human with gray fur on his face, greeted them in the main laboratory. "Captain Thexera, I heard about your missing cubs. This is awful news. What can we do to help?" "You can explain how 12 Zephyrian cubs vanished from a secured ship while orbiting your station," Thexera replied, her voice like grinding metal. "I honestly don't know." Peterson spread his hands wide. "We have only 15 people on this station, and none of us have left in the past week. Our transport shuttle hasn't been activated." "Your transporters?" "We don't have transporters," Peterson explained. "Humans haven't developed that technology yet." Thexera's warriors began their search, tearing through laboratories and living quarters with methodical efficiency. They found star charts, research equipment, and personal belongings, but no sign of the missing cubs. In the station's small recreation area, one of her warriors called out, "Captain, you need to see this." Thexera approached to find her soldier, standing over a collection of soft objects scattered across the floor. They were various shapes and sizes, covered in different textures and colors. "What are these?" she demanded of a nearby human technician. "Stuffed animals," the young man replied nervously. "Toys. We bring them from Earth to make the station feel more like home." "Toys." Thexera picked up one of the objects. It was shaped vaguely like some kind of quadruped covered in artificial fur and filled with soft material. "These are weapons." "No, no." The human shook his head rapidly. "Children play with them. They're for comfort and companionship." Thexera stared at the pathetic object in her hands. These humans were even weaker than intelligence reports had suggested if they needed artificial creatures for emotional support. She tossed it aside and continued the search. Hours passed. Her warriors had torn apart every room on the station twice over. They had interrogated every human, subjected them to truth scanners, and analyzed their brain patterns for deception. Nothing. "Captain," her lieutenant approached carefully. "Could the cubs have escaped the ship on their own?" "Impossible, taxara snapat." "They're only 6 months old. They can barely walk, let alone operate escape pods or bypass security systems." But doubt was creeping into her mind. Zephyrian cubs were indeed capable of surprising acts of cunning and violence, even at a young age. In the wild, they often wandered from their dens to hunt small prey. Could 12 of them have somehow worked together to escape their nursery? "Expand the search to the surrounding space," she ordered reluctantly. "Deploy scanning probes to search for life signs on nearby asteroids and debris fields." As her warriors prepared the search equipment, Thexera stood in the station's observation deck, staring out at the void of space. Somewhere out there, 12 helpless cubs were drifting in the cold darkness, probably terrified and alone. The maternal instincts that all Zephyrian females possessed, even those like her who had never borne young, clawed at her chest. Behind her, she heard the soft footsteps of Dr. Peterson approaching. "Captain, I know this is a difficult time," the human said gently. "If there's anything else we can do to help find your cubs, please ask." Thexera turned to study his face. Humans were strange creatures, but their expressions seemed genuine enough. Peterson's eyes, those peculiar soft orbs that showed every emotion, appeared filled with sincere concern. "Why do you care?" she asked suddenly. "Our species have no alliance. We're not friends." Peterson was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because they're children," he said simply. "Any parent knows the terror of losing a child, regardless of species." Something in his tone made Thexera pause. Perhaps there was more to these soft creatures than she had assumed. But before she could respond, her comm unit chimed with an urgent message from a ship. "Captain, we've detected faint life signs in the asteroid belt. They're weak, but consistent with Zephyrian biological signatures." Relief and dread battled in Thexera's chest as she prepared to return to her ship. If the cubs were in the asteroid belt, they were probably dying. Even with their natural resilience, 6-month-old Zephyrian cubs could not survive in open space for long. The search was about to become a rescue mission, and time was running out. The rescue shuttles launched from the Zephyrian vessel with desperate urgency. Captain Thexera commanded the lead craft, her claws gripping the pilot controls as they raced toward the asteroid belt. The life sign readings were scattered across a wide area, suggesting the cubs had somehow dispersed throughout the rocky debris field. "Life support readings are critical," her navigator reported grimly. "Whatever atmosphere they're breathing won't last much longer." Thexera's mandibles clicked with anxiety. How had the cubs even survived this long? Space was a vacuum. They should have died within minutes of exposure, unless they had found shelter somewhere among the asteroids. But even then, the cold would kill them quickly. "There," her pilot called out, pointing to a large asteroid tumbling slowly through the void. "I'm reading 3 life signs from that rock." The shuttle maneuvered carefully between spinning debris until they could see into a deep crater on the asteroid surface. Thexera's breath caught. 3 small forms huddled together in a natural cave formation, barely visible in the shadows. "Get us in position for teleport extraction," she ordered. But as the transport beam activated, something strange happened. The cubs didn't materialize on the shuttle's platform. Instead, the beam seemed to bounce off some kind of barrier around them. "What's interfering with the transport?" Taxara demanda. Her technical officer ran quick scans. "Captain, there appears to be some kind of energy field protecting them. It's not Zephyrian technology, and it's not natural to the asteroid." Then, before she could finish the thought, a human shuttle appeared from behind the asteroid. Dr. Peterson's voice crackled over their comm system. "Captain Thexera, please don't use your transporters yet. The cubs are in a delicate situation." "What are you talking about?" Thexera snarlet. "Are you responsible for this?" "In a way, yes," Peterson replied calmly. "But not how you think. We found them first. They're safe, but we need to extract them carefully." Rage built in Thexera's chest. The humans had found her cubs and done nothing, left them stranded in space while pretending to help with the search. "Explain yourself immediately, or I will open fire on your vessel." "Captain, please listen." Peterson's voice remained steady despite her threat. "Your cubs weren't kidnapped. They escaped your ship on their own, using an old maintenance pod. We detected the launch and traced them here. When we found them, they were scared, cold, and hostile. Every time we tried to approach, they attacked with remarkable coordination." Thexera felt a flicker of pride despite her anger. Even as infants, Zephyrian cubs were formidable opponents. "So we established a protective barrier around them and have been keeping them warm and oxygenated while we figured out how to safely extract them without triggering their defensive responses," Peterson continued. "Why didn't you contact us immediately?" There was a pause before Peterson answered. "Because we thought you might react exactly as you did, with accusations and threats. We wanted to understand the situation first." The human shuttle moved closer, and Thexera could see through its transparent aluminum viewports. Inside, 3 humans sat at control stations, monitoring various displays and instruments. They appeared to be maintaining the protective field that was somehow keeping her cubs alive. "Show me," she commanded. The humans transmitted their sensor feed directly to her shuttle screens. The images revealed the 3 cubs huddled together in the cave, their small bodies pressed against each other for warmth. But they weren't just surviving. They appeared to be sleeping peacefully. "How is that possible?" Taxara whispered. "Cubs that age don't sleep deeply in strange environments. They should be alert and aggressive." "That's what surprised us too," Dr. Peterson said. "We tried several approaches to contact them, but every time we sent in a probe or attempted to communicate, they became agitated and prepared to attack." Then Dr. Sarah Chun had an unusual idea. "What idea?" She suggested that maybe they weren't responding well to our technology or our attempts at formal contact. So instead, she started singing to them. Thexera's 4 eyes blinked in confusion, singing human lullabies, soft, gentle songs that we use to comfort our own young. At first, the cubs remained hostile, but after several hours of consistent, non-threatening sounds, they began to calm down. The video feed switched to show recordings from earlier. Thexera watched in amazement as her people's most feared predator cubs gradually relaxed their defensive postures. Their small heads turned toward the source of the strange melodic sounds, their eyes growing heavy. "They fell asleep to human songs?" she asked incredulously. "Not just that," Peterson continued. Dr. Chun noticed they kept trying to huddle closer to the source of the sound. So she programmed our barrier generators to emit specific frequency patterns that mimic the sensation of a warm, breathing body. Thexera stared at the screen. Her cubs were sleeping peacefully, their small forms pressed against what appeared to be empty air, but was actually an energy field designed to feel like a living creature's chest. "You made them think they were sleeping against a parent," she realized. "Something like that. We studied audio recordings of Zephyrian family units and noticed that cubs often sleep pressed against adult chest cavities, listening to heartbeats and breathing patterns. So we replicated those biometric rhythms. For the first time since the cubs went missing, Thexera felt her rigid posture relax slightly. These humans had not only saved her cubs' lives, but had somehow understood their psychological needs better than she had expected. There are 9 more cubs missing, she pointed out. We know. We've located them throughout the belt. They all escaped in different maintenance pods. Apparently, they can override basic security systems even at their age. We have teams monitoring all of them, maintaining life support, and keeping them calm with the same techniques. Thexera's mind reeled. 12 6-month-old cubs had successfully executed a coordinated escape from a secure military vessel, using stolen maintenance equipment to disperse across an asteroid field. It was either the most impressive feat of infant cunning she had ever heard of, or they were trying to hunt, she realized suddenly. This is hunting behavior. Excuse me. Cubs this age begin to exhibit hunting instincts, Thexera explained. In the wild, they leave the safety of their dens to track prey through dangerous terrain. We thought the ship's nursery would satisfy these instincts, but apparently not. Peterson was quiet for a moment. So they weren't trying to escape because they were unhappy or mistreated? No, they were following millions of years of evolutionary programming. They needed to hunt. Thexera felt a mix of admiration and exasperation, and they succeeded brilliantly. They identified targets, planned an escape, acquired transportation, and dispersed to reduce detection risk. For cubs their age, it's remarkable. Well, they certainly showed impressive problem-solving abilities, Peterson agreed. But now we need to get them home safely. The question is how to extract them without triggering their defensive instincts again. Thexera studied the peaceful cubs on her screen. They looked so content, sleeping against the artificial warmth the humans had provided. An idea began to form in her mind. Dr. Peterson, I may have a solution, but it will require your continued cooperation. What do you have in mind? If the cubs respond well to simulated parental contact, then perhaps we can use actual parental contact. But we'll need to do it gradually, and we'll need your technology to make it work. As Thexera outlined her plan, she found herself looking at the humans with new respect. These soft, seemingly defenseless creatures had accomplished something her own warriors could not. They had calmed 12 terrified predator cubs using nothing but patience, creativity, and an understanding of what the young truly needed. The joint operation began at dawn by human time measurements. Captain Thexera found herself working alongside Dr. Sarah Chun in the human shuttle's cramped medical bay, learning to operate technology that seemed impossibly delicate compared to Zephyrian equipment. The key is gradual transition, Dr. Chun explained as she adjusted the biofield generators. We'll slowly modify the artificial heartbeat and breathing patterns to match your own biological rhythms while introducing your scent markers. Thexera watched the human's small hands work with surprising precision. Dr. Chun stood barely 5 feet tall and possessed none of the natural weapons that Zephyrian females were born with. Yet she moved with the confidence of someone completely comfortable with dangerous situations. You do realize, Thexera said carefully, that if this plan fails, the cubs will likely attack anything that approaches them. Their claws can cut through most materials. I know, Chin replied without looking up from her instruments. Peterson showed me the footage of adult Zephyrian combat capabilities. Impressive. Yet you're not afraid? Chin paused and met Thexera's gaze. Captain, I've been working with scared children for 15 years. The species doesn't matter as much as you might think. Frightened young ones need safety, comfort, and patience. Everything else is just details. Thexera felt something stir in her chest that she couldn't quite identify. Admiration, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. The first test came with the trio of cubs in the large asteroid cave. Chin had modified her biofield to gradually incorporate Thexera's biological signatures while maintaining the comforting rhythms that had kept the cubs calm. Field transition at 10%, Chin reported. Cubs are still sleeping peacefully. Through the sensor feed, Thexera watched her people's young resting against what they believed to be a protective parent. Their small forms rose and fell with the artificial breathing pattern, their tiny claws occasionally flexing in their sleep. Increasing to 20%, Chun continued. One of the cubs stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Its head turned toward the stronger scent markers, now being introduced into the field. Remarkable, Thexera murmurat. In normal circumstances, any change in their environment would wake them instantly. They're exhausted, Chun observed. The escape, the fear, the cold. It took everything they had. Now they're experiencing the deepest rest they've probably had since leaving your ship. At 50% transition, the cubs began to wake. But instead of the violent alertness Thexera expected, they blinked slowly and made soft chirping sounds. Their small heads turned back and forth, searching for the source of the familiar scents. Now, Captain, Chin said quietly. Thexera activated her personal teleporter and materialized inside the protective barrier. The cub's head snapped toward her instantly, their eyes widening. For a tense moment, she thought they might attack. Instead, the smallest cub made a questioning trill and took a hesitant step toward her. "Hello, little hunter," Thexera said softly, crouching down to make herself less intimidating. The cub approached cautiously, its nose twitching as it processed her scent. Behind it, the other two cubs watched with alert but no longer fearful expressions. When the first cub reached her, it pressed its small snout against her armored leg and made a satisfied purring sound. Phase 1 successful. Chin's voice came through the comm. Cubs are accepting your presence. The reunion process repeated throughout the asteroid field over the next several hours. Each group of cubs required careful handling and gradual transition, but the technique worked perfectly every time. As Thexera gathered the young ones, she began to understand what had really happened. They weren't just hunting, she explained to Dr. Peterson as they collected the final group. They were establishing territory. Each group claimed a different asteroid and set up a defensive position. At 6 months old, Zephyrian development is accelerated compared to most species. By their age, wild cubs would already be participating in pack hunts. Thexera watched the last 3 cubs as they cautiously approach her. The problem is that our modern ships don't provide appropriate outlets for these instincts. So they created their own adventure, Peterson said with what humans called a smile. A dangerous one that could have killed them all, Thexera pointed out, though she couldn't hide her pride in their accomplishment. As the final cubs settled against her, Thexera felt the warm weight of their small bodies and realized something important had changed. Not just in her understanding of the cubs, but in her perception of the humans who had saved them. "Dr. Peterson, I owe your people an apology," she said as they prepared to return to the ships. "No apology necessary, Captain. We all acted to protect the cubs." "That's exactly my point," Thexera replied. "You had no obligation to help us. Our species have no treaties, no formal relationship. Yet when you found our young in danger, your first instinct was to protect them." Peterson was quiet for a moment. "What else would we do?" The simple question struck Thexera with unexpected force. What else would they do? In her experience, most species would have either ignored the cubs entirely or attempted to capture them for political advantage. The idea that anyone would simply help because it was the right thing to do was foreign to Zephyrian thinking. "Your people are not what our intelligence report suggested," she admitted. "What do they suggest? That humans were weak, primitive, and motivated primarily by self-interest." Peterson chuckled. "Well, we are pretty primitive compared to your technology, and we definitely have our selfish moments. But when it comes to children," he shrugged. "I guess that brings out something different in most of us." As they docked with the Zephyrian vessel, Thexera found herself in an unusual position. Protocol demanded that she should simply take custody of the cubs, thank the humans for their assistance, and depart. But something else was pulling at her mind. "Dr. Peterson, Dr. Chun," she said as the humans prepared to return to their station. "Would you consider accepting an invitation to visit our homeworld?" Both humans looked surprised. "That's very generous, but I'm not sure. I'm serious, Thexera interrupted. Our cubs clearly responded to your methods better than our own traditional approaches. Perhaps there's something we could learn from each other. Chun and Peterson exchanged glances. We'd be honored, Chun replied finally. Though I should warn you, human child-rearing techniques might seem strange to your people. After today, I suspect strange might be exactly what we need, Thexera said. As the humans departed, Thexera carried the cubs to the nursery quarters. But instead of placing them in their individual sleeping alcoves, she made an impulsive decision. She settled into the large resting area herself, allowing the cubs to arrange themselves against her chest and legs as they had done in the asteroids. Within minutes, all 12 cubs were purring softly as they listened to her heartbeat. Their small claws kneaded gently against her armor, and their breathing gradually synchronized with her own. For the first time, Thexera understood what the humans had recognized immediately. These cubs didn't need just food and shelter and protection. They needed connection, comfort, and the security of knowing they were valued, not just as future warriors, but as individuals deserving of love. As she drifted towards sleep herself, surrounded by the warm weight of 12 tiny predators, Thexera made a mental note to completely revise the intelligence reports about humans. Some threats, she realized, came disguised as weakness, but some strengths came disguised as softness. 3 months later, the Zephyrian homeworld witnessed something that had never occurred in its violent history: a human delegation walking freely through the capital city of Kethmora. Dr. Sarah Chun marveled at the massive structures towering around them, their crystalline surfaces reflecting the light of 3 suns. Zephyrian architecture emphasized strength and permanence, with no visible weak points or decorative elements that might suggest softness. Intimidating, isn't it? Captain Thexera commented, walking beside her. The city is designed to demonstrate our power to visitors. It's magnificent, Chun replied honestly. But I have to ask, where are all the children? Thexera's mandibles clicked in what Chun had learned to recognize as amusement. Traditionally, Zephyrian cubs are kept in protected compounds until they reach maturity. Public spaces are considered too dangerous for developing young. But you're changing that. We're trying to, Thexera said. Your success with our cubs has forced many of us to reconsider our approaches to child rearing. They reached their destination, a new facility that looked dramatically different from the surrounding architecture. While still unmistakably Zephyrian in its imposing scale, the building incorporated softer curves, transparent walls, and what appeared to be large recreational spaces. The Integrated Development Center, Thexera announced proudly. The first facility on our world designed using combined Zephyrian and human principles. Inside, Chun gasped. Hundreds of Zephyrian cubs moved freely through interconnected play areas, climbing structures, and open spaces. Some were engaged in combat training that would have terrified most species, but others were participating in activities that looked surprisingly familiar. Is that cub reading? Dr. Peterson asked, pointing to a small Zephyrian hunched over what appeared to be a data tablet. Reading human literature, actually, Thexera confirmed. Adventure stories seem to satisfy some of their hunting instincts without requiring actual danger. In another area, a group of cubs had arranged themselves in a circle around an adult Zephyrian who was making rhythmic sounds. Not quite music by human standards, but clearly an attempt at the lullabies that had proven so effective during the rescue. The hardest part, Thexera explained as they walked, has been convincing our adults that showing affection doesn't weaken our young. Many traditionalists believe that cubs should earn comfort through strength alone. Chun watched a large adult Zephyrian carefully position himself so a tired cub could rest against his armored chest. The scene was almost identical to what she had witnessed in the asteroid field months earlier. Change is never easy, she said diplomatically. No, but the results speak for themselves, Thexera replied. Cubs raised with these new methods show improved problem-solving abilities, better emotional regulation, and actually superior combat performance when they reach maturity. They paused in an observation window, overlooking a large recreational space where human staff members worked alongside Zephyrian caretakers. Chen recognized several colleagues who had volunteered for the cultural exchange program. "How are your people adapting to working with humans?" Peterson asked. "Better than expected," Thexeris said. "Initially, many of my people were concerned that human influence would make our cubs weak. Instead, they've become more adaptable and creative. The combination of Zephyrian strength training and human emotional support appears to produce remarkably balanced individuals." In the space below, a human woman was reading to a group of young cubs, while an adult Zephyrian demonstrated combat forms nearby. The cubs seemed equally engaged with both activities, their attention shifting naturally between the story and the physical training. "There's something else I want to show you," Thexeris said, leading them to another area. They entered a smaller chamber where the 12 cubs from the original incident were engaged in various activities. Chun immediately recognized them. Their distinctive markings and the confident way they moved made them unmistakable. "The asteroid adventurers," she said with obvious affection. The cubs looked up at her voice and immediately abandoned their activities to rush toward the viewing window. Their excited chirping and clicking filled the chamber as they pressed against the transparent barrier. "They remember you," Thexera observed. "How could I forget them?" Chin replied, placing her hand against the window. Several cubs pressed their small paws against the glass from the other side. "They've become celebrities of sorts," Thexera continued. "Their successful escape mission, as we now call it, inspired changes throughout our society. Cubs who show exceptional initiative and creativity are now encouraged rather than restrained, and the hunting instincts channeled into structured exploration programs. We've established safe wilderness areas where cubs can track, hunt, and establish temporary territories under supervised conditions. The results have been remarkable." Peterson watched as the cubs demonstrated some of their new skills for Chen's benefit. They moved with the fluid grace of natural predators, but there was something different about their behavior, a confidence and curiosity that seemed broader than simple aggression. "Captain," he said thoughtfully, "I'm curious about something. You've implemented these changes fairly quickly for such a major cultural shift. Was there much resistance?" Thexera's posture straightened slightly. "There was significant opposition initially. Many questioned whether adopting human methods would compromise our strength as a species. What changed their minds? The 12 cubs you see here challenged a group of traditionalist adults to a tactical simulation exercise. They wanted to prove that the new training methods were superior." Chun looked alarmed. "Cubs challenged adults to combat. Not physical combat," Thexera reassured her. "A strategic puzzle scenario. The adults were given standard military training and traditional hierarchical command structure. The cubs were allowed to use their new problem-solving approaches and collaborative techniques. And the cubs won decisively. They identified solutions that none of the adult teams had considered, adapted to changing conditions more quickly, and demonstrated better coordination despite having no formal command structure." Peterson whistled softly. "That must have been quite a shock to your traditionalists." "Indeed. When 12 six-month-old cubs can outthink experienced military officers, it becomes difficult to argue that new methods make us weak." As they watched, one of the cubs approached the window and began making specific clicking sounds. Thexera clicked back, and the cub seemed to respond with excitement. "What did you tell him?" Chen asked. "She asked if you were staying permanently. I explained that you're visiting, but will return to your own world." The cub made a series of different sounds, and Thexera's expression grew thoughtful. "What now?" "She wants to know if she can visit your world someday, to see how human cubs learn and play." Chun felt a warm sensation in her chest. "Tell her that I think that would be wonderful, but she'll have to grow a bit bigger first." As Thexera translated, the cub chirped happily and scampered back to her companions to share the news. "You know," Peterson said quietly, 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be planning cultural exchange programs with a species our governments barely acknowledged existed, I'd have thought they were crazy. 6 months ago, Fexera replied, if someone had told me that humans would revolutionize Zephyrian child-rearing through the power of bedtime stories and hugs, I would have had them examined by medical professionals. Chen laughed. Funny how a few missing cubs can change everything. Not missing. Fex_era corrected with obvious pride. Exploring. They were never lost. They were just finding their own way home. As they prepared to leave the center, Chun took one last look at the cubs through the observation window. They had resumed their activities, but kept glancing toward the window, as if making sure she was still there. Captain, she said suddenly, I have an idea. What would you think about establishing a permanent joint research facility? Not just for child development, but for studying how our species can learn from each other. Fexera's 4 eyes widened slightly. You would be willing to make such a commitment? I think we'd be foolish not to, Peterson added. The potential benefits for both our species could be enormous. There would be considerable political complications, Fexera warned. Not everyone in our empire is ready for such cooperation. Then, we'll start small, Chin suggested. Maybe with a few researchers, a small station somewhere neutral. Let the results speak for themselves. Fexera was quiet for a moment, considering. Finally, she spoke. There's an uninhabited system on the border between our territories. It has a stable star and several habitable worlds that could support both our species. Perfect for raising adventurous cubs, Peterson observed with a grin. Indeed, Fexera agreed. Though I suspect any cubs raised in such an environment would be quite remarkable individuals. As they left the development center, Chin couldn't help but smile at the thought of Zephyrian and human children growing up together, learning from each other's strengths, and sharing each other's curiosity about the universe. After all, some of the best discoveries happen when you weren't looking for them, when you were just following your instincts to explore, protect, and connect with others. Sometimes the greatest adventures began with the simple act of caring for someone who needed help, regardless of species, politics, or the vast distances between worlds. And sometimes the most unlikely friendships started with nothing more than a frightened child and someone willing to sing them safely to sleep.